Joining me now is a former federal prosecutor and an NBC News legal analyst, Glenn Kirshner. So, Glenn, if you knew the Southern District of New York was doing what they're doing and Mueller was doing what they're doing, and you've seen Cohen, what should the president fear more?
I don't know that we can really parcel out the danger to the president. I do think that the Southern District of New York is probably evaluating whether they may be dealing with a potential RICO case, racketeer-influenced corrupt organizations. Mm-hmm. It's in the early 2000s, I was trying RICO cases right here in Washington, D.C. Right. We were going after big gang activity in the city, gun running, murder for hire, drug running. And one of the real challenges we have is proving that there is a hierarchy, because to bring a RICO case, you need to establish a hierarchy, an actual organization, not just a sort of disorganized street crime gang. Right. Well, what do we have in the Trump organization? If ever we had a hierarchy, that's it, because you have one person who, by all accounts, is at the top, and nothing happens without his say-so.
Let me ask you this. So Michael Cohen pled guilty to this campaign finance violation. Alan Weisselberg didn't have to because he had some immunity, and David Pecker didn't have to because he, I guess, had some limited protection here in order to participate. That leaves the only other participant being the president. Is it possible SDNY has a sealed indictment on the president? Is it possible this is something they're waiting to get approval of an attorney general? That's a missing piece here. Would you, if you're going to indict Cohen, how do you not indict the other party involved?
Yeah, one of the big questions is, can a sitting president be indicted? And, I think I'm in the same camp with Neil Katyal and Professor Lawrence Tribe in believing that a sitting president can be indicted. There's no constitutional prohibition. Right. There's no legal prohibition. There is an OLC, a DOJ policy memo saying we don't think it's a good idea. But I've posited a hypothetical that in other times might seem crazy, but I think less so given what we're contending with now. If a president, a corrupt president, were to bribe 34 senators such that even if he was impeached by the House, he could never be convicted and removed by the Senate because they couldn't reach the requisite two-thirds, right? Then the OLC memo saying you can't indict a sitting president says, tough luck, America. Nothing you can do about it. I think in this day and age, when we're living with some of what we see coming out of this administration, that policy memo has to be revisited. So whether the Southern District will try to go there or will try to perhaps get the approval of Barr, the Attorney General, to indict a president and not unseal that indictment until after he leaves office is anybody's guess.
I was just going to say, how often do sealed indictments or delayed indictments? I mean, that's just not something that's done very often, is it?
We do it a lot, and we do it a lot.
Under what circumstances?
Under the circumstances where there's an ongoing gang investigation, for example. And we are asking the grand jury periodically to return sealed indictments, but we still have one or more bigger fish that we need to investigate before we're prepared to take the whole thing down. Under those circumstances, it's not at all unusual to return sealed indictments and then unseal them and do a coordinated takedown when the time is right. That could be going on here.
All right. But let's talk about another aspect that may happen. Right now, it looks like the Southern District of New York is just running roughshod over the Trump organization. There is a new boss that the SDNY has to deal with, and that is Bill Barr. Yeah. If SDNY said, we want to do a sealed indictment, can Barr say nope?
Listen, everybody calls the Southern District of New York the sovereign district of New York because, they beat their chest. They're very strong. They're very aggressive, appropriately so.
And they're very good. I mean, they're very good. I mean, there's a reason.
I would like to think the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office was very good, too. But they still are under the leadership of Bill Barr. So as independent as they are, they still have to get approval for any sort of high-profile decision with respect to a president, an administration official. So they are not free of oversight from Bill Barr.
I want to go back to Alan Weisselberg, because he's going to be coming to Congress. His immunity was limited. What does that mean? Is he out of the woods? But if he's still working for Trump, it means he hasn't turned on it. What makes his different than, say, Michael Cohen's?
He's still deeply in the woods as far as I can tell, because we've heard the reporting that he has some limited immunity for purposes of talking about the campaign finance violation piece.
Yeah.
But guess what? He's going to testify before Congress. And I'm quite sure Congress is not going to limit its questions to just that offense. So Weisselberg is going to have a decision to make. Do I tell them everything? Or do I invoke the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and force the government, Congress, and the Southern District of New York prosecutors to decide between granting him full immunity so he can testify about everything, or there's another way we can extinguish his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. We can charge him, try him, and then once we prosecute him, his Fifth Amendment right to self-incrimination will no longer be in play.
Given how important Michael Cohen testified that Alan Weisselberg was, if you were a prosecutor at this point, if he seems, forget Michael Cohen, if you believe you're dealing with a RICO case, I mean, is there anybody that is the keys to the kingdom more than him?
Yeah. It's almost cliche that the bookkeeper is the person that the government turns to help bring down a criminal organization. It all involves a balancing of sort of the public need and how much do we need to protect the public against a potential criminal? You know, Alan Weisselberg may be a financial criminal, but I don't think he's out on Fifth Avenue shooting people. No. So if it were me, now I don't know all the facts, but I would seriously consider giving Weisselberg complete immunity.
Don't charge him.
Get everything we know about the criminal shenanigans of the Trump organization, and then the only way he gets in trouble is if he lies. So it gives him every incentive to tell the complete truth.
Is that a flip? Would you call that person flipping?
You know, giving somebody immunity is not technically a flip. It is a way to pressure the truth out of him.
Fascinating. Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.